Dobro. History. Archive.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into one of the most unbelievable scientific deceptions in modern history. It's the story of a national hero who promised the world miracle cures, but delivered a lie so huge it shook the foundations of science itself. So on November 24, 2005, this is what the world heard. A public confession from a global icon, a man celebrated as his country's greatest scientific mind. But here's the thing. That apology? It wasn't the end of the story. It wasn't even close. It was the beginning of the real investigation into a lie that was so much deeper. See, on that day, Dr. Hwang's big confession wasn't actually about the science. He admitted to what he called ethical lapses, that he'd used eggs from his own junior researchers. Now, this turned out to be an incredibly calculated move, a kind of public sacrifice meant to protect a much, much bigger lie. But how on earth did he get to this point? I mean, to really understand the fall, you have to understand the rise. So let's rewind a bit and look at how South Korea, in a desperate race for global leadership in biotech, literally manufactured a national hero on a scale we've never really seen before. He wasn't just another researcher in a lab coat. The government created a title just for him, the Supreme Scientist. He became this living, breathing symbol of the entire nation's ambition in the super high-stakes biotech race. And the level of state support was just staggering. I mean, this goes way beyond a simple research grant. We are talking about 24/7 protection from national intelligence agents, free first-class flights for a decade, and being put in charge of a massive, state-of-the-art facility. Honestly, he was treated less like a scientist and more like a head of state. And get this, he even cooked up this brilliant cultural story to explain his amazing success. He called it the chopstick theory. It was a genius way of explaining why his team could do what all the Western labs couldn't. It connected modern science with ancient tradition, and it made his success a huge point of national pride. Okay, so let's get to the science itself, because this is where the story really takes off. Between 2004 and 2005, Hwang published two absolutely earth-shattering papers in the prestigious journal Science. These papers promised to completely change medicine as we know it. The pace was just breathtaking. In 2004, he proved therapeutic cloning was even possible. Then, just 1 year later, he claimed he'd perfected it, that he'd made it incredibly efficient and that it was ready for patients. The world was absolutely electrified. And this created what people started calling an alliance of hope. I mean, thousands of people with incurable diseases were signing up, desperate for his treatments. And with a prominent American scientist basically vouching for him to the Western world, everyone believed it. But you know how these stories go. Inside the lab, at least one person knew the truth. And this is where the perfect story, this whole national myth, starts to crack, all thanks to the courage of a whistleblower and a small team of investigative journalists. So the first thread the journalists at the investigative TV show PD Notebook started to pull, well, it didn't lead them to fake data, not at first. It led to something much more personal. Where were the human eggs for this research actually coming from? The whole investigation really started with one brave person. A former researcher, Ryu Young-jun, was the whistleblower. His tip led to an expose on the unethical egg donations, which then triggered this massive nationalist backlash. The public was furious. They branded the journalists as traitors, and their show lost every single one of its advertisers. So while the public and the government were all busy debating ethics, the journalists were chasing a much, much bigger story. They had a hunch that the science itself was a complete fabrication, and they were going to prove it. The smoking gun finally came when the producers from PD Notebook flew all the way to the University of Pittsburgh, and there, under some really intense questioning, a former lab researcher just broke down. He admitted he was ordered to fake the data for the 2005 paper by literally photoshopping images of cells. But a confession isn't enough, right? They needed definitive, irrefutable scientific proof. So they somehow managed to get their hands on samples of the so-called cloned stem cells and samples from the patients who supposedly donated the original cells. They sent them all out for DNA fingerprinting. The results were devastatingly simple. The DNA from the stem cells did not match the DNA from the patients. They weren't clones. The entire premise of his world-changing research was a total lie. So let's just pause for a second and remember the core claim, the one that made him a global hero. Hwang announced to the world in the top science journal
that he had created 11 unique patient-specific stem cell lines. And the actual number? The real number, confirmed later by Seoul National University's official investigation? 0. Not a single one of the 11 lines was real. None of them.
This table really just lays the whole thing bare, and it is stunning. It wasn't just fake results. The entire process was a disaster. He claimed he used 185 eggs. The real number was over 2,000. He claimed the donors were voluntary. Turns out, many were pressured or paid. The entire operation was built on deceit from top to bottom.
Well, the fallout was immense. Hwang was indicted for fraud and embezzlement. And the scandal exposed these huge systemic failures in science, in the media, and in government. It's really a timeless warning about the dangers of unchecked ambition and what can happen when national pride goes too far.
You know, this whole thing has some really striking parallels to the more recent Theranos scandal. Both Woo-suk and Elizabeth Holmes were these incredibly charismatic figures who built what you could call a reality distortion field around themselves. They sold a compelling story, they weaponized public hope, and they covered it all up with fabricated data.
But here it is, the most baffling, mind-bending twist in this entire story. Amidst all the lies, one of his incredible claims was actually true. In 2005, his team cloned an Afghan hound named Snoopy, and independent tests later proved that Snoopy was, in fact, the world's first cloned dog. The skill was actually real.
And that leaves us with this final, really provocative question that just cuts right to the heart of this whole tragedy. Why would someone with legitimate, world-class, groundbreaking talent choose to commit such an elaborate and destructive fraud? And what does that tell us about the pressures of modern science and the seductive power of becoming a hero?